just because he couldn't find the meaning and value of his own existence. The man simply sent himself to a mental hospital, intending to become a complete madman. But just after arriving here, a strange old man jumped out, opened his right hand and asked him how many fingers he was holding up. The man hesitated slightly and said 4. 4? Another idiot. The man, having regained his senses, felt a bit confused. But the instinct to learn still drove him to find the old man again, seeking the correct answer. Unexpectedly, the other person ignored him completely, only burying his head in complex math problems on the table, until the man noticed the leaking paper cup on the table, and tore off the label to patch the gap for him. Only then was the stubborn and arrogant old man moved. So he took one of the man's hands, and asked the same question from earlier in the day. But the answer was still not 4. If you focus on the problem, you won't see the answer. Don't focus on the problem. Look at me. Following the old man's guidance, he began to shift his gaze away from the fingers, and the correct answer appeared accordingly. 8? 8. 8. That's right, that's right. 8 is a good answer. Afterwards, the old man told him the principle contained in this question, which is to use a different perspective, to view the whole world. Learn to dig into aspects that ordinary people find hard to discover. The man smiled slightly after hearing this, suddenly feeling that the old man before him was not simple. And the fact was exactly that. The next day, the head nurse here told him the old man was the big boss of a well-known local clothing company. He had sent himself in to break through a design bottleneck, attempting to draw creativity and inspiration from mental patients, to better stimulate his own creative potential. It's just that he had become a bit obsessed, becoming a madman with strange behavior. But Patch disagreed with this. He firmly believed the old man was not insane, but a total genius, because using the philosophy he taught, Patch quickly cured his roommate's swirl delusion. That night, the roommate couldn't sleep because he needed to pee. But in his eyes, the floor was full of squirrels, and if he got out of bed, he would be attacked and bitten by them. So he refused to go to the bathroom no matter what. At this moment, Patch thought of the principle the old man had explained, and began to look at the problem from a different angle. So he followed the roommate's perspective and empathized. Entering the roommate's mental world, he pulled out a gun, and shot the squirrels hiding in the corner of the bed. At the foot of the bed, there is one. Bang. There is one running past the sprinkler. Behind the door, behind the door. Later, they even built a bunker with their hospital beds, and launched a battle under the moonlight. As the imaginary squirrels were wiped out, the roommate finally ran to the bathroom with a sense of relief, listening to the trickle of water coming from inside. Patch's empty heart was finally filled at this moment. He began to re-examine the meaning and value of his own existence, which is to bring healing and salvation to more people. So he decided to leave the mental hospital, to become a good doctor who heals the sick, and is good at listening, rather than the rude and incompetent person before me, and that irresponsible quack. Because when he communicates with patients, he doesn't even lift his eyes. When dealing with a roommate's complex condition, he just forces the patient to get an injection to stop the fuss. When facing a conscious vegetative patient, he automatically ignores their existence. When he encounters patients laughing at a party, he directly calls the nursing staff to force them to disperse. This aggressive, rude way of ignoring the patient's inner feelings makes Patch feel disgusted. That is why he ignores the doctor's warning, and wants to be discharged against medical advice. I will write AMA on the report, which means leaving the hospital against medical advice. My report will say IDGARA, which means I don't care about you, because he voluntarily came to the psychiatric hospital in the first place. He does not need the doctor's permission to leave. After returning home and looking at the various antidepressants, he begins to feel fortunate that he found his life's direction in the hospital. From then on, he officially changed his name to Patch, which means to mend, because he believes that doctors are there to mend wounds and heal the body and mind of others, with a dedication to medicine and a desire to heal others. 2 years later, Patch successfully got into Virginia Medical School, officially becoming a medical student. However, as soon as he arrived at school to register, he was mocked by his roommate. It's not that I'm being rude, but aren't you too old to be studying medicine now? Facing questions about his age, Patch is speechless, because he really cannot find an example of someone old and vigorous to fight back with. So he has to leave the dorm early and go to the classroom to wait. But the first class of university is just as unpleasant as his roommate. The dean bluntly says that as a doctor, one should be detached and not get too close to patients. You must maintain a superior attitude, because only then can you demonstrate professionalism and make patients trust you unconditionally. But this is exactly the opposite of the philosophy Patch holds. So he stops listening to the lecture, and instead sneaks a peek at the beautiful woman in the back row. At just one glance, he is deeply attracted by her beauty. So after class, he chases after her to strike up a conversation. But Karen has no interest. In this chat, please. I'm not here for a date. I'm not here to fall in love. I'm here to study. She says this and turns away resolutely. And this awkward scene is seen by Truman on the side. As someone who is also isolated from women, he is very excited. Glad that he has found a kindred spirit who shares his plight. So the two outgoing bachelors immediately have lunch together. At the table, Patch criticizes the dean's philosophy. Without any hesitation, he believes that doctors should not be high and mighty, but to actively interact with patients, providing hope for life while offering treatment. In short, it is to learn how to listen, to delve into the hearts of patients, to prove that the point is valid. He and Truman disguised themselves as doctors and snuck directly into the group of third-year interns. When the seniors referred to patients by their conditions and only cared about the illness and the treatment, Patch was the only one who asked the professor for the patient's name. I just want to know the patient's name. Maggie. Hi, Maggie. Just such a brief interaction tore off the label of cold doctors in a patient's heart and immediately eased the tense mood. Afterward, Patch continued to look for experimental targets in the hospital, but accidentally ran into the stern dean coming straight toward him. He quickly hid in a nearby ward, because first-year students are not allowed to enter or leave the hospital privately. But when he turned back, he discovered many children fighting against leukemia. At an age that should be filled with laughter, they could only lie on their hospital beds in silence, having lost the vitality that childhood should have. So Patch used his old trick again, first stepping forward to kindly ask for their names, then picking up a blood pressure bulb, attaching it to his nose, and turning into a clown, instantly making the disappointed little girl beam with joy. The other children also became interested in his funny appearance, so he dressed himself up as a little bee, letting this innocence and joy reach every child. He even dressed up as a pirate captain in white, dancing in the center of the stage, resisting the wind and waves in an imaginary ocean. For a moment, smiles bloomed on every young face. They seemed to have forgotten the sorrow of their pain and found a release for their souls, until the head nurse arrived, ending this joyful yet absurd treatment. But when Patch turned to leave with a smile, he bounced straight into the dean's stern face, because it was a first offense, and other teachers spoke highly of Patch. He only received a mild warning from the dean. I need to tell you a reality. Passion cannot make a doctor. Only I can make a doctor. The current rules of the hospital are the crystallization of hundreds of years of experience and have irrefutable logic. So the dean hoped that he could follow the rules and not be clever. But no sooner had Patch agreed than he changed into a strange costume again and went to the hospital privately to tell fairy tales to the children in the wards and play games while bringing joy. He also gave them hope for life. Not only did the children and parents enjoy it, but he also often made the nurses laugh out loud. And during this time, he did not stop pursuing Karen. He often invited Karen to go to the hospital together to enjoy the joy of interaction. But she was focused on pursuing academic grades, because her journey to get into university was not easy. Only by putting in double the effort could she keep up with the pace of geniuses. As for what Patch did in the hospital, she only thought it was grandstanding and a waste of time with clown tricks, useless for improving grades. But when the midterm results were announced, her view of Patch was overturned. Therefore, she was no longer annoyed by Patch's pestering, but instead humbly asked him for the secret to studying. And Patch was also generous enough to share everything he knew. He hit the nail on the head, saying, "It is better to be without books than to believe everything in them," meaning that she shouldn't just bury herself in books, but should deepen her understanding and memory through practice. So that night, she finally accepted the invitation to go to the hospital with Patch. The person they interacted with this time was an elderly person in the twilight of their life. The photo of the person in their prime by the bedside reflected their vibrant youth. Patch was seen quietly placing a toy gun into their palm, then jumping up at the sound. He used balloons to dress himself up as a ferocious beast, letting the elderly person experience a hunting trip on the African savannah. The colorful balloons pieced together a vibrant fairy tale world, bringing unexpected surprises to the other elderly people around as well. It's nothing. Should I go check? I said it's nothing. As the popping sounds in the ward gradually ceased, the elderly person also expressed appreciation and affirmation to Patch, because hunting in Africa was a long unfulfilled wish. Now they were finally satisfied, with no more regrets in life. At this moment, Patch noticed the elderly woman next door, and asked about her wishes for the rest of her life. The woman said that when she was a child, her mother would cook noodles, and she always liked to eat them with her hands. So her wish was to jump into a swimming pool filled with noodles and swim. Looking at the light in the woman's eyes as she spoke, Karen finally realized that this was not a grandstanding trick, but a meaningful performance. At the same time, it also deepened her understanding of clinical symptoms. On the way back, Patch expressed his feelings again. Compared to the previous repulsion, this time Karen neither agreed nor refused. But there was a smile on her face. And she even said goodnight to him. Because by now, she had already experienced Patch's magic. However, there were patients in the hospital he couldn't handle. After the man in room 305 was diagnosed with a terminal illness, he began to hate life, and his personality became very violent and reclusive. He was a forbidden zone that no nurse wanted to enter. But Patch tried to use massage and singing to bridge the distance between them. But the beautiful singing was seen by the other person as trampling on his self-esteem. Therefore, unsurprisingly, Patch was rudely kicked out. But giving up was never in his dictionary. The next day, under the astonished gaze of everyone, Patch walked into that intimidating room 305 again. Because he had already found the weakness in the other person's heart. Since you hate life, then I will become God to judge you. And this tactic hit the patient's heart exactly. Because in the vast sea of people, there was finally someone who could understand his sorrow. After a trial, the other person's inner knot was finally untied. And they were gradually infected by Patch's optimism. Willingly, facing the rest of their time calmly. In the days that followed, Patch became a very popular regular in the hospital, opening up to various patients to help them solve their problems. However, on this day, his unauthorized entry into the hospital, and his behavior of playing on the hospital bed, were caught again by the dean during rounds. Tell me what you are doing. Just bringing some laughter, sir. Medical evidence shows that laughter promotes the secretion of pituitary hormones, thus increasing the oxygen-carrying capacity of the blood and relaxing blood vessels, promoting heart rate and lowering blood pressure. It has a positive effect on heart and respiratory diseases. Although he spoke eloquently, the dean clearly didn't buy it. He warned Patch, if you want to be a clown, go to the circus. The patients here don't need entertainment. And they don't need friends. They only need doctors to diagnose and prescribe medicine. If you are caught again next time, you will be expelled. In addition, the dean also questioned his grades to his face. Because someone reported him for cheating on exams. Without much speculation, Patch knew it was his roommate who was causing trouble. If you don't like me, just say it. I don't like you. Why don't you like me? You are annoying, but I like you. Because you make my efforts look like a joke. It turns out, his roommate Mitch was born into a family of famous doctors, and had even won the Thompson Scientific Achievement Award. But he never slacked off in his theoretical studies, studying cases and books every day, just to be able to use them at critical moments, to save a life. But Pat all day, making him feel unbalanced inside, causing jealousy, because that was a talent he could never reach. In the evening, Patch found Truman, complaining that the dean was inflexible, and followed the rules too strictly. But Truman thought the dean also had a point. After all, people in the hospital are suffering, or facing death. But Patch retorted, everyone is facing death. But the goal of the hospital should be to improve the physical and mental health of patients, to improve the quality of life of patients, and not just to delay death. Truman couldn't judge who was right or wrong for a moment. So he advised Patch to keep a low profile in the future. But the dean already held a grudge against the student who didn't follow his rules. To make things difficult for Patch, he announced that the National Expert Medical Lecture next week would be arranged by Patch in the auditorium to receive a professor of obstetrics and gynecology, and specifically stipulated that the welcome ceremony must match the other party's status and position. The friends couldn't think of a good theme for this, but Patch already had an excellent idea in his mind. The next day, when the bus slowly arrived at the Virginia Medical School, and the experts were walking towards the ceremonial hall chatting and laughing, they were stunned by the decorations in front of them. Please come in. Be careful, it's a bit slippery. If you think it's hot outside. Wow. Come on, come on. The dean was so furious at the scene that he gritted his teeth. But some experts smiled knowingly, because it really did feel like a home away from home. Afterward, the dean felt humiliated. So he decided to settle old and new scores together, to expel the student who had broken the rules time and time again from the campus. How dare you make a fool of our distinguished guests? At this point, if you think I will continue to tolerate you breaking the rules. What are you laughing at? Is this some kind of big joke to you? Get out of here. In order to continue studying at the college, Patch had to find the principal to plead for mercy. Fortunately, the principal was very reasonable, given that Patch had excellent grades, and had truly reduced the negative emotions of patients in the hospital. He decided not to expel Patch, but he also had to consider the dean's face. So he ordered that, except for special circumstances, Patch was not allowed to step into the hospital again. But a special circumstance soon arose. A patient in room 305 was on their deathbed. At the very last moment of life, the patient specifically requested Patch to sing for them one more time. the nursery rhyme that was left unfinished when they first met. But this time, Patch's hoarse throat could no longer sing the cheerful melody, because he was witnessing the moment life entered the cycle of reincarnation. How could he suppress his feelings of sadness? Just after he finished saying goodbye to the fading life, he ran into the unsatisfactory rules of the hospital again. A mother's daughter was seriously injured in a car accident, but the hospital required her to fill out tedious forms first, before she could visit the life hanging in the balance. This scene made Patch lament that the hospital's procedures were absurd. They also complained about their dissatisfaction with the hospital. Finally, they reached a perfect conclusion: that it is best never to get injured or sick in one's life. Although this was just a drunken fantasy, this conversation gave Patch a sudden realization. Since the existing rules were unreasonable, could he start something new himself and eliminate the tedious procedures and absurd rules? He excitedly shared his philosophy with Karen to start a free medical clinic, using humor and joy as a second remedy. An ideal hospital where patients and doctors work together, where learning is the highest goal, and love is the ultimate purpose. Everyone helps each other to realize their dreams together. But Karen thought this idea was too crazy, because they had no sufficient funds at all as a foundation for the ideal. So how could they talk about pursuing higher goals? However, she still underestimated Patch's perseverance and determination. After 2 years of accumulation, as they ended their junior year, they finally became interns as they wished. And Patch also believed that the time was now ripe. So that day, he drove Karen to a quiet mountain area. The car slowed to a stop at the end of the road. The two helped each other to a cliff, witnessing together how the sunlight brightened the summer scenery, weaving romantic poetry with green vitality. And the future base of Patch's ideals would also be built in these lush green mountains. As for the financial support, it all came from that old man in the mental hospital. It turned out that these rolling mountains and the abandoned wooden house, they were just the old man's long-forgotten backyard. He greatly admired Patch's ideas. Therefore, he used 1/10,000th of his wealth to quickly establish this health clinic. Those who came here to enjoy free medical care were mostly people in dire straits, or homeless wanderers. But here, they all carried unique trajectories and significance, because while everyone was receiving help, they also did their best to help others solve their problems. Everything was moving in the expected direction. The whole hospital was as beautiful as a paradise. And during this time, the relationship between the two finally reached its peak. After 2 full years of pursuit, Karen finally accepted Patch's confession. She confessed that she had experienced devastating trauma in her past relationships. So she had always envied the caterpillars outside the window, because no matter how unbearable their past was, they could eventually break out of their cocoons and transform into brilliant butterflies. And now, her broken self, finally, under Patch's gentle mending, had the courage to love again. In the days that followed, Karen was awakened every day by a warm voice. It was Patch reading romantic poetry to her. But this beauty did not last long. One day, a patient arrived at the hospital, a psychiatric patient with self-harming tendencies. Karen's first impression was that the person was not friendly, but Patch accepted him without any hesitation. He even said, if we don't show him compassion here, then where else can he go? Little did he know, he would pay a heavy price for this. As time passed, the supplies in the hospital were gradually exhausted. For this reason, the three decided to split into 2 groups. Patch and Truman would disguise themselves as a doctor and a patient to go to the dean's hospital to borrow some medical supplies, while Karen, on the other side, was responsible for purchasing daily necessities. After returning, she received a message for help from the psychiatric patient later. She originally intended to ignore it, but remembering what Patch had said, Karen still decided to go to the address in the message to provide whatever help she could. However, unfortunately, her life was frozen on that dark night. When he learned of Karen's death, Patch fell into deep self-reproach, because the culprit of this disaster was his own blind optimism. He did not have the courage to face Karen's funeral. Until the crowd of mourners dispersed, did he slowly step forward, and towards the lingering presence of his girlfriend, recited the poem that had not yet been finished. Life is like a rushing river. The left bank is the unforgettable memories. The right bank is the distant future. But flowing in the middle is the sorrow he could never let go of for the rest of his life. In extreme despair, Patch prepared to dissolve the health clinic, because Karen's death brought not only a long, damp life ahead, but also the subversion of his entire medical philosophy. Previously, the dean had said that as a doctor, one must be detached and keep a distance from patients. At the time, he scoffed at it, but now he believed in it deeply. Even though Truman begged him bitterly, he walked away without looking back. The tools that were once used to get closer to patients were also discarded by him as trash. However, at this moment, roommate Mickey suddenly appeared. He begged him not to leave. It took him 2 years to catch up with Patch in grades. Yet now he discovered that the gap between the two was still worlds apart, because he, who ranked first in the major, could not manage to get that old lady who liked to eat with her hands to eat. I guarantee I am better than any doctor or nurse in this hospital. But I cannot get her to eat. You have a gift. You can connect with people. If you leave, I won't be able to learn that. However, Patch was unmoved after hearing this, and just left in despair, because his heart was already filled with regret, and he held no expectations for the future. When he stood on the edge of the cliff, ready to meet Karen in another world, a butterfly dancing gracefully appeared, landing precisely on his heart. It seemed to be telling him, "There is still love and warmth in your heart." The butterfly flapped its wings, looking into his eyes affectionately. Everything seemed to return to that gentle moment. Karen once said that what she longed for most was a butterfly. Now her initial wish had been fulfilled, transforming into a brilliant butterfly, drifting with the wind into the wider world. And Patch suddenly saw things clearly at this moment. He also wanted to fulfill his initial wish, to spread love and hope to the wider world. So he hurried back to the hospital. "Do you still need my help with Mrs. Gennady?" Then Patch and his roommate Mickey secretly pushed the grandmother outside, and waiting for her here was an unexpected surprise, and a memory from childhood that was hard to forget. Under the kind gaze of everyone, and with Patch's enthusiastic help, this 80-year-old lady successfully rejuvenated. She wandered freely in a dream filled with flowers. Her wish was finally fulfilled, and her life would be complete from now on. But because Patch's actions were too sensational, he was directly expelled by the dean. Why? Because you are not suitable. There are standards and regulations here. You make the patients and those around you uncomfortable. I think it's you who feels uncomfortable. You can just see this as a personal grudge. 3 years of hard work were easily dismissed. In a fit of anger, Patch drove away with his file, only to find that his performance indicators were nearly perfect. But the dean's reason for expulsion was actually for making patients overly happy. Feeling lost, he sought help from his roommate Mickey. The other suggested he appeal directly to the state medical board. With the excellent grades in his file, perhaps he could win some leniency from the judge, thereby retaining the right to continue his studies. Following his roommate's suggestion, Patch sued the dean for malice to the board, arguing that expelling him due to a personality conflict was unreasonable. But it was clear the dean was also prepared. He didn't mention the personal grudges at all, but directly accused Patch of violating regulations by practicing medicine without a license in the hospital. This was an extremely serious charge, and also an undeniable fact. The judge also began to lean towards the dean's side, asking if he had ever considered the consequences of causing a patient's death. Facing this unfavorable situation, Patch defended himself sternly. What is wrong with death? A doctor's mission should not just be to avoid death, but to improve the quality of the patient's life. Death is not the enemy, everyone. Why should we treat it as such in the doctor-patient relationship? A doctor's mission should not just be to avoid death, but to improve the quality of life. That is why treating a disease may result in a win or a loss. But treating a person, I guarantee you will always win, no matter the outcome. Then, he admonished the medical students in the hall. Many miracles of life in medicine are not due to superior medical skills or the efficacy of drugs, but due to an optimistic mindset and positive emotions. So from now on, please do not just pursue grades, but learn to communicate and convey positive emotions. Learn from the nurses who spend every day with the patients, and learn from the professors who are full of humanity and are always rushing around the hospital. Finally, he expressed to the judge and everyone present his determination to become the best doctor in the world. Even if I cannot graduate and obtain my degree today, you have the power to prevent me from graduating. You can prevent me from getting a title and a white coat, but you cannot control my soul. You cannot stop me from learning. You cannot stop me from researching. I promise you one thing. This thorn that is me will never disappear. His words made the judges lower their heads in silence. This was a battle between rules and humanity, and a contest between indifference and passion. Just then, Truman suddenly pushed the door open and entered. He brought the who had received help from Patch. To show their support, the children were seen, all wearing those funny red rubber noses. In the eyes of everyone, they all gave the highest affirmation to the love and joy that Patch brought. In the end, the Medical Association unanimously determined that Patch's actions were improving the existing medical system and philosophy. Although there were slight violations, they could not hide his great love for the patients. Therefore, they directly rejected the dean's accusation and retained Patch's right to continue his studies. Once the verdict was out, everyone stood up and cheered. Clearly, this spark of hope that is Patch had already begun to spread in this medical sanctuary, and would eventually form a prairie fire that would stretch for miles. Time passed gently, and the years were like poetry. The chapter of university came to an end. Patch, as an outstanding graduate, stepped onto the graduation stage. Dean Walcott personally presented him with his diploma. "I am glad to see you finally being serious for once. You are happy too soon, sir." He captured the final humor of his university days at the graduation ceremony, bringing an unexpected surprise to everyone. And of course, some stunned shock as well. This is a true story. In the following 12 years, Patch followed his own philosophy and founded a home-based medical service organization, treating over 15,000 people for free. As of 1998, on the waiting list, there were over 1,000 doctors waiting to quit their jobs to join Patch's ranks. But it is worth mentioning that Dr. Patch himself once questioned the film, believing that it distorted his medical philosophy, because in the film, ignored the details of the patient's medication treatment, exaggerated the role of joy in the healing process. But in fact, he himself never doubted that a doctor's essential job is to treat illnesses and prescribe medicine, rather than to amuse patients. What he pursued was to build a positive, harmonious, and humanized medical environment, to improve the increasingly distant, indifferent, and rigid doctor-patient relationship at the time, to use humor and laughter as a second remedy for healing, to enhance the internal and external health of patients, to improve their quality of life, to heal their hearts while treating their illnesses. His views were very advanced for that time, but it cannot be denied that they improved the existing medical system and philosophy. That health hospital located in West Virginia also became a paradise that many patients and doctors longed for. Even if this philosophy did not eventually spread like wildfire as hoped, it would still become a valuable experience for future generations. Even if one encounters obstacles and doubts along the way, even if one is at odds with the whole world, it is hard to shake the determination in his heart. And this persistent pursuit is the shared commitment of every dreamer. May you and I both be like Dr. Patch, holding a sincere determination and fearless courage to practice the philosophy we hold on to try to realize the dreams we carry, to light up the direction of the future with every action, to find the light on the path ahead with every effort, until reaching the utopia where the heart finds peace. The future of tireless ideals is free and bright. The end of a vibrant youth is full of endless scenery. The flame of the ideal will eventually spread.